If you're spending loads of time in the gym but not building muscle, this might be why.
Your love is rated X. That means you're extraordinary.
If you're spending loads of time in the gym but not building muscle, you're probably missing one of these. First, you're not training close enough to failure. If your sets feel super easy, they're probably not doing that much. Secondly, your exercise selection. If none of the exercises that you are doing follow the pattern of being stable, controllable, and easy to add weight to through a good range of motion, then you're probably going to struggle to build muscle. And third, you're not progressively overloading. If the weights, reps, quality of the reps are not increasing over time, your body has no reason to adapt to it. So first, are you training close enough to failure? It's actually often much more difficult than we might initially think. And if we don't train to failure very often, it can be very difficult to ascertain whether we're actually getting that close to failure. And you might find that over time, you start to shift further and further away from where failure actually is. Now, for the safety of ourselves, others, and avoiding an injury, getting a sense of where failure actually is important to do, but also important to do safely. But going to failure is not the scary thing that a lot of people imagine when they think of failing a lift. This is because going to failure and your 1 rep max are not the same thing. When you think of the Olympics with weightlifting, or you think of a powerlifting competition, these are 1 rep maxes, the maximum amount that you can lift for 1 repetition. But training to failure isn't just this. The 1 rep max test is your most extreme form of going to failure because you physically cannot be lifting any more weight. And for a lot of people, doing a 1 rep max test, especially with a complex lift, is just not realistic for working out where failure is. And whether a 1 rep max test is even safe to use depends on a number of factors like your technique, injury history, and your age. So all that to one side for now. Finding where your failure point actually is can be done in safe ways and can be a really useful tool for knowing what it feels like to be close to failure, not just for that exercise, but for the rest of your exercises as well. Now, going to failure comes in 2 key ways: technique failure and absolute failure. Technique failure is where your form is going to noticeably break down. It's a bit subjective because a lot of the time you will need someone else observing you to understand where technique failure actually happens. So it can be useful to have someone who knows what they're looking at, like a trainer, looking at what you're doing, or by videoing your sets if you know what you're looking for. And with experience, you can start to feel where technique failure might be happening, though it's still always a good idea to get a visual, as it can be really difficult to properly observe and lift at the same time. When form failure happens, it often means that it's no longer effective or safe to carry on with that lift. And this is really important to keep in mind when you're doing more complex compound lifts. Lifts like squats, deadlifts, snatches require good technique to be safe, especially when you're lifting heavy loads. Now, absolute failure is where you cannot physically complete another rep. And if we're referring to being about 2 reps away from failure, absolute failure is probably what we're going to be referring to. Now, while it's really useful to understand what failure actually feels like, training to absolute failure constantly can be really exhausting and will increase your recovery time. So if you are doing a lot of training that is all the way to failure, prioritizing having an adequate amount of time between your workouts on the same muscle groups is really important. But for many people wanting to build muscle, it can be just as effective to train close to failure rather than to absolute failure. Working close to failure can be a lot more enjoyable, less intimidating, and a lot less exhausting to recover from, as well as being less likely to make you want to leave the gym and never return. So, when it comes to working out what failure actually feels like, it's important to test this regularly and to test it with something safe and easy to fail on, especially if you're new to it. With hypertrophy training, where you're aiming to build muscle mass, you're going to be working probably somewhere around the 6 to 12 rep range. You're not going to be failing a 1 rep max, and you'll be aiming to test this at about this rep range. There are a lot of moves that are very safe to fail, especially if you're close to the floor or you're not really at risk of dropping a weight on yourself. Something like failing a bicep curl tends to be pretty safe because the dumbbells aren't really going anywhere if you can't lift them. Something like a lat pull down or a cable row is going in a straight line, and if you drop the weight, it is unlikely to hurt you or anyone else. Because our muscles need a strong enough stimulus to grow, training really far away from failure is not very effective. Ideally, when it comes to hypertrophy, we want to be working at a 60 to 80% of our 1 rep max. So that's a few reps away from failure. Now, a good measure of this is to go to failure on a safe exercise, as we've already discussed, and take off about 2 to 3 reps from that failure number. Now, what you're wanting to aim for is having that 1 to 2 reps away from failure be within that 6 to 12 rep range. So a good rule of thumb is that if you are getting 2 or more reps above your rep range, you'll want to increase your weight and drop the reps back down. And if you're getting 2 or more reps below the rep range that you're aiming for, you'll either want to decrease your weight or drop the reps down. And when it comes to what it feels like, you should be feeling moderate to significant effort, so the set should not feel super easy. You might start breaking a sweat, you'll find that your reps start to slow down and that it will take concentration to get your rep done well. You won't be failing that last rep, but you will start to feel that you're getting close. And to keep a good gauge on it, going to failure on an exercise that is safe to do so, if it is safe to do so for you, at least once a month can be a really good way to stay in tune with what it feels like to actually go to failure. Now, moving on, secondly, your exercise selection matters. When it comes to building muscle mass, so building the size of your muscles, it is important to try and include exercises that are stable, controllable, easy to add load to, and that provide a good range of movement. When it comes to building muscle mass, it is really important to include those stable movements. And as a general rule, it's also great to include moves that you can progress consistently on, because it's a very motivating reason to go back to the gym. Functionality is very important for athleticism, stability and control, but there is a balance to be struck if you want to build muscle mass. If all of your workout consists of moves that are very unstable, very difficult to control, very difficult to load, and difficult to get in a good range of motion, you will struggle to build muscle mass. This is because you're working against so many other factors that make it difficult to improve your number of reps, your weight, or your quality of reps. It makes it more difficult to consistently do the move in the same way. For building muscle mass, we want to include those moves that are stable, controllable, easy to add weight to, and make it much more straightforward to progressively overload those muscles. Something like a leg press or a hip thrust is stable, controllable, easy to add weight to, and provides a good range of motion. Squats, for example, might be a little bit less stable, but they're still quite easy to progressively overload because you can keep adding weight to the bar as long as you've got good technique. Whereas something like a pistol squat or a shrimp squat, something where you're very unstable, is much more difficult to add weight to because you are relying so much on your stabilizing muscles. But there is absolutely no reason why you couldn't do these and also do another move that is more focused on muscle building. And that is the beauty of hybrid training. You can include both muscle building and skills within the same workouts or the same workout routine. Now, it's also important to point out that using those stabilizing muscles is important for your function outside of the gym. If every movement that you do is maximum stability and control and maximally optimized for progressive overload, you can end up missing muscle groups, missing movement patterns, and finding that you don't actually have that much functional strength in daily life. Especially when it comes to including a lot of isolated exercises. If all of your gym workouts are targeted very specifically, it's easy to miss muscles, especially if you're not very thorough with your research. And finally, you're not actually progressively overloading. Now, you might be thinking this sounds like the exact same step that I just said, but it's not the same. This is about tracking what you're doing, because it's incredibly difficult to progressively overload if you can't remember what you did last week or last month and you don't know where you even started. Progressive overload requires you to be increasing your reps, your weight, and the quality of your rep. If you don't know what you're doing, it is very difficult to do this. Not only this, but you are leaving a whole heap of motivation on the table because you don't get to see when you do your personal bests. Writing down your workouts helps you to see when consistency is paying off. And it also means that you can see where you might need to push yourself that little bit more to get a few more reps or a little bit more weight onto the bar. It's also important to see whether you're actually progressing because you need that reference point to work with. If you are following an online plan or an online plan from a trainer, or you are looking for an online plan, the app that you are using will most likely have an in-app tracker. So I advise using it because it should be able to show you what your history is in terms of what you've been doing in your past workout. And if it doesn't, or you're DIYing everything yourself, use a notebook or a notes app. Importantly, if you are DIYing everything yourself, keep track of what movements you're doing as well, so that you know what those numbers relate to, because you might think that you remember now, but in a month's time, you will not know what that's talking about. You are DIYing your own plan. Make sure to consistently do the same moves over and again. You don't have to do the exact same workout every single time, but ensuring that there are moves that you are working on consistently means that you get to see that progress with those moves, and it's straightforward to progressively overload them. Because if you're switching between moves constantly, it's really, really difficult to see A, whether you've actually progressed, and to try and find an equivalent weight to what you were using before when the moves aren't actually the same. So that's a quick rundown of some of the mistakes that you might have been making in muscle building. If you would like to watch more videos, please subscribe down below. Any research and resources that I have used will also be linked down below, along with my website and online programming. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon.